Hello there. Welcome to Know Where to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. We're going to talk about the governor's State of the State address. And actually, I'm going to show you some very accurate predictions that were made regarding what the governor would be promising and regarding what he would be talking about. You might think there were clairvoyants that were watching carefully and reading the tea leaves, but no, just people with experience in watching what politicians do versus what they say. I've got details coming up next.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.
Once again, welcome to Know Where to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. It's an exciting time in Idaho. The legislature is now back in session, which is, of course, why the governor gave his State of the State address yesterday. And there's a very decidedly conservative turn to how the legislative agenda, is proceeding ahead. However, the governor in his State of the State address also listed out his priorities. We're going to cover some of those. But before we do, I want to give you a little prognostication from the Idaho Freedom Foundation. This is from Ron Nate. The state of our gem state, by the way, he's the president of the IFF, an IFF preview for 2025. And you are going to think, my goodness, he must be clairvoyant, but I'm telling you, it's because Ron has paid attention and knows how politicians operate. So we start with, first of all, a prediction. Here's what we're likely to hear in the governor's State of the State address. And I'm going to give you his actual remarks here in a moment. We will hear a limited token nod to school choice intended to stave off real school choice. The governor will mention his great cooperation with Idaho Superintendent Debbie Critchfield in drafting a plan to provide small scholarships to a limited number of students in needy families, expand charter school options, and the new curriculum opportunities from PragerU's partnership with the Department of Education, which, by the way, is aided by collaboration with IFF. But we know that's not enough. Okay, what did the governor actually say then? Well, take a look. The governor's State of the State address said, I recognize the growing desire to expand school choice, especially for students with unique physical or developmental conditions. It's for everyone, but yes, them as well. I'm recommending $50 million to expand further education options for Idaho families. Just like we do with every taxpayer dollar that is spent in government, we will ensure there is oversight in school choice. Why? Because accountability in government is an Idaho value, and it is what taxpayers demand and deserve. Now, of course, the ultimate accountability is in parental choice, but, nonetheless, there it is, $50 million. Well, that's a lot of money, you say. No, it's a drop in the bucket. It's a pittance compared to what the governor is willing to spring for in terms of for the public schools. But let's hear it in his own words. We also are going to hear, this is from the IFF prediction here. Okay, he will talk about more spending and, here comes that word, investment in public education. We expect the governor to ignore the facts that public education has seen a tripling of its budget. At the same time, outcomes have stayed flat at roughly 50% proficiency in reading and math since 2008. Instead, the governor will tell us that even more spending is needed to repair the broken system. Remember the $2 billion in spending expected over the next 10 years on schools, facilities, bonds? Yeah, we do. So what did the governor actually say? Well, once again, IFF was right on the money. Governor Little said Idaho offers an abundance of schooling options for each student's unique needs. Yes, within the public school system. We lead the nation in expanding and supporting public charter schools, again, within the public school system. I was proud to receive the National Charter School Champion Award on behalf of our state after we cut red tape and added more support and flexibility last year. Public charter schools are unquestionably popular in our state, serving about 30,000 students, up 30% from just 5 years ago. Now he says, I support charter schools because they offer family more options for their children's education while providing taxpayers the accountability and transparency they deserve. But are they getting the results they deserve? That's something he doesn't answer. We're also one of the few states that enable parents to choose the best school for their children in the public school system, regardless of where they live, and our popular Empowering Parents program offers grants to support students' education outside the classroom. That sounds like a lot of rah, 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 but Governor Little says, just as we expect the following from our public schools, any school choice measure I would consider must be done the Idaho way. which means it is fair, responsible, transparent, and accountable. I wonder if those terms are as malleable as they could be in his mouth or in the mouth of some of these politicians. It must prioritize the families that need it most, and it must not take funds away from public schools. We will do so while continuing to prioritize first and foremost our public schools. Now, let me make sure we understand. Our government schools. Adequately funding government schools is both our constitutional and our moral obligation, and we will not abandon that obligation. Constitutional and moral obligation. Now, let's remember, Idaho's Constitution was written at a time where public schooling was spreading across the U.S. and where it was such an important idea, it had to be done at gunpoint. Yes, mandatory. You don't get a chance to opt out. That's why we have truancy laws. That's why it's compulsory schooling. But do you suppose the times have changed at all? And if so, why? And if not, maybe explain why not. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. The Idaho Freedom Foundation weighed in saying, look, while others laud Governor Little's attempt at expanding school choice, we are not so thrilled. In yesterday's press conference, he suggested imposing teacher certification, curricula, and testing requirements. This is just our failing public school system in different packaging. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Well, if we could just make, these school choice options more like whatever the government's doing, then it'll be safe. But the question again, is what the government's doing working? Ryan Spoon, by the way, says this is correct. Government accountability, that's just government attempting to imprint their failed system and woke agendas on private schools, homeschoolers, and everyone else that has already escaped the failed government school system. Let parents choose, Governor Little. All right, moving on. Also, there's the sour grapes from the press. And here's a wonderful juxtaposition. Lauren, thank you for your keen eye and this wonderful meme. The first headline, it's hard to see, but it's Governor Little's likeness from his State of the State address. The Idaho statesman with its sour grapes firmly in mouth, Idaho governor caves to pressure, sets aside $50 million for, here are the scare quotes, school choice scheme. Well, now let's look at KTVB's headline here. Oh, Idaho program expands to help students pursue in-demand careers. Could the bias be more obvious? By the way, $50 million for one, $80 million for the one that they just love. Oh, as long as we're in control, it's the greatest thing ever. Just dreamy. The fact that the statesman has that approach should tell you a little bit about which side of the issue is more inclined to be prone to support freedom and choice and which one isn't. Representative Heather Scott did not push back as far as the headline about, well, he caved to pressure. She says, yeah, pressure like popular will and legislative representation. What the leftist rag is really doing is making it seem like $50 million is some huge concession, but it's not. She says, we will be pushing for real school choice this session, not some token amount just to check a box. Thank you, Representative Scott. That's reassuring. Now, here's back to the governor's State of the State address. He talks about more, or this is the prediction from Ron Nate from the Idaho Freedom Foundation. More investments for highways and bridges. Did you see that word investments keeps popping up here? It's in quotation marks, as well it should be, because it's spending. It's taxpayer money being spent, as well as water and wastewater projects. This on the heels of record spending in these areas under the era of big COVID spending and expansive federal debt. There was over $300 million included in these areas in last year's budget. Oh, and don't forget the wasted money we'll see from Idaho hanging onto a dilapidated transportation department building on West State Street in Boise. The restoration estimates are now double what was first estimated, standing at $62 million. So did the governor talk about such things? My Keeping Promises plan continues the trend. I'm proposing another round of tax relief for hardworking Idaho families, $100 million on top of the $4.6 billion we've already given back to Idahoans over the past 5 years. We also promised and delivered unprecedented investments. It's funny, there's no quotation marks there. In schools, the American worker, water, roads, fire, outdoor recreation, and other infrastructure without raising taxes. Now, My Keeping Promises plan, he says, builds on those investments by adding more support for schools on top of the 80% increase in state funding we championed for education since I took office. Again, there's a lot of spending. He's taking credit for all the good things, the blessings that it brings, but it also brings a corresponding burden that the taxpayers are expected to bear. Now, there was one high point, and this is the high point we're going to end on here, and that is we have also kept our promises to Idahoans by standing up for common sense values. And by the way, the governor got the biggest applause of the day when he got to this line. Idaho was the first state to take action to defend women's sports. And he says, I was incredibly proud of the Boise State University women's volleyball team for standing up for what was right. Generations have worked hard to guarantee our girls and women can play fair and square. To our female athletes, he says, we will continue to fight for you. So that was actually a very positive thing. And he's right to laud them for standing up to the wokeness that insists that, oh, yes, that player at San Jose State University that's really a guy pretending to be a woman, but nobody is allowed to notice this. Well, they and many other teams said, look, the emperor has no clothes. They paid a high price for doing so, but they did the right thing, and they deserve accolades and recognition and appreciation for being willing to take the shots in the name of truth. So there you have it. There's the real state of the state. I would recommend, if you want to find out more about what's going on, the Idaho Freedom Foundation has some wonderful opportunities coming up for you to learn how legislation goes through the legislative process. That's with Legislature 101, which is coming up on the 9th. Hopefully you can attend in person at the Lincoln Auditorium in Boise. I've got more details coming up, and of course, follow them on social media to find out what is happening with your tax dollars, what politicians are doing versus what they're saying, and how that fares for your freedom. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.